As time went on, our bond grew even stronger, and we were blessed with 2 beautiful daughters. We both had stable, successful careers. Emily worked as a translator at a film studio, while I was employed as a security guard for a local company. My love for Emily was boundless, and I never doubted her devotion to me. Our health was good, and we lived in a lovely house in a great neighborhood. Life was, in every sense, picture perfect. After our second daughter was born, Emily struggled to shed some of the weight she gained during pregnancy, but her striking blue eyes never lost their allure. She decided not to wear contacts anymore since they irritated her when reading or working, so she stuck to her glasses. Those large frames only highlighted her gorgeous eyes, making her even more captivating. My love for her remained unchanged, and I was absolutely sure she felt the same way about me. Our connection was undeniable. With 2 amazing daughters and no financial worries, our family life was a dream. I couldn't have been happier, until that day when everything started to fall apart. After 15 years of marriage, an unexpected event cast a shadow over our seemingly perfect world. Over the past few years, Emily had developed a habit of going out with her female coworkers on Friday nights. They'd meet at different pubs and bars after work to unwind. Emily often reassured me it was just a way for them to catch up and relax, and I never had a problem with it. On those evenings, I took care of our daughters, preparing dinner and helping them with their homework, which brought me a lot of joy. Emily would usually return around 8 p.m., and we'd still have time to enjoy the weekend together as a family. We'd always have a nice dinner with our girls on Saturday evenings, something we all looked forward to. But in recent months, things began to change. Emily started coming home later on those Fridays, not arriving until 10 p.m. sometimes. I could tell she'd had a few drinks, but I never made a fuss about it. After all, she was still the same loving and affectionate wife I'd always known. Every time she came back, she'd flash me that familiar smile, and I couldn't help but wrap my arms around her. I convinced myself that these nights out were just her way of unwinding from the stress of her job. I trusted her, and I had no reason to believe anything was wrong, at least, that's what I thought. Then, a few weeks ago, on a Monday morning, I got an email from an anonymous sender. The person claimed to be just a friend. My first instinct was to delete the message without reading it, but something made me pause. I decided to open it and see what it was about. The email said something like this: "I was at the Black Crow last Friday, and I saw your wife there with a group of people. She seemed to be having a great time, but I couldn't help but notice she was dancing mostly with one particular guy from her company. In case you're curious, I snapped a picture with my phone. Take a look at the photo, and if you think there's nothing to worry about, feel free to ignore this message." Attached to the email was a photo. As I sat there, my heart began to race. Why would someone send me a message like this if it was all innocent? The mere fact that I'd received the email planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I hesitated for a moment, not sure if I really wanted to know what was in the picture. The idea that Emily had been dancing with a man she'd never mentioned bothered me deeply. Up until that point, I'd always assumed that she only went out with her female coworkers, but now it seemed like there was more to the story. I tried to reason with myself, thinking maybe she was just dancing with someone who happened to be there, nothing more. But the uneasiness gnawed at me. Despite my hesitation, my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the attachment. The photo appeared blurry, as if the person had taken it discreetly, but I could still make out enough. In the background, I could see her coworkers, both men and women, sitting at a long table. And there, to the right, on the dance floor, was Emily. She was wearing a beige blouse with red flowers and green leaves, paired with brown trousers, the exact same outfit she wore the last time she went out. As I stared at the photo, it hit me that it must have been taken just last Friday, the night Emily came home later than usual. I remember it well. She didn't walk through the door until 10:30, and when she hugged me, she looked at me in a way that seemed different. Glancing back at the picture, I couldn't help but notice the happy smile on her face. But something else caught my eye. There she was, standing on the dance floor, wrapped tightly in the arms of a tall, younger man. They were so close that Emily's arms were draped around his neck, and the sight shocked me. I couldn't recall ever dancing with her like that, and I certainly had never acted that way with any woman, especially not in public. His body was pressed up against hers, and it didn't take much to imagine what he must have been feeling, considering how close they were. It seemed all too natural that there'd be some attraction. The strangest part? Emily didn't look the least bit bothered by it. In fact, she looked pleased, almost like she was enjoying it. When their eyes met in the photo, her expression only added to my discomfort. The image of my wife, the mother of our 2 daughters, wrapped up in some stranger's arms, showing affection in such a public way, left me speechless. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This wasn't the Emily I knew. I couldn't remember a single time she'd ever danced with me like that, and I couldn't understand how she'd allow someone she barely knew, or did she know him well, to hold her so closely. Suddenly, a flood of questions filled my mind. Who was this man? Was he truly a stranger, or someone she knew? Doubts started creeping in fast, each one growing larger than the last. My mind spiraled into endless possibilities, imagining her with this man, and with others I didn't know. Nausea hit me hard, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time before vomiting up the remnants of my breakfast. As I stared into the mirror, a wave of disbelief washed over me. Was this really happening? Could my Emily be having an affair? How could she betray not only me but our daughters as well? My thoughts swirled, but one question kept rising above the rest: who was this guy? I couldn't shake the idea that he must be someone from her workplace. How long had this been going on, right under my nose? What had driven her to this point? And had she really crossed the line? Determined to uncover the truth, I knew I needed hard evidence to make sense of it all. For the next half hour, I locked myself in the bathroom, trying to pull myself together. My mind raced between sadness, anger, and a thirst for revenge. One moment, I imagined confronting her, lashing out, screaming, demanding answers. The next, I thought about holding her, begging her to end this madness. Divorce even crossed my mind, but just as quickly, I wondered if I could forgive her and give her another chance. Sitting there, head in my hands, I felt like I was losing it. The emotional roller coaster was too much. But eventually, I managed to calm down. I realized I couldn't act on impulse. I needed to be smart about this, to watch her behavior carefully before making any decisions. I wasn't about to let my emotions rule me. I needed facts, clarity. I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. I needed more solid proof to understand if what I was seeing was harmless fun or something much worse. At the same time, I knew one thing for sure: she hadn't been completely honest with me about these outings. Her office was just a few blocks away from mine, and since I often had flexibility with my job, I figured I'd use that to my advantage. The next day, just before lunch, I discreetly parked my car at the far end of her office parking lot. With my tinted windows, I was confident I could watch without being noticed. For several days, I kept a close eye on the office, observing her movements. It wasn't until Friday around 12:15 p.m. that I finally saw her leave with a group of people. There were 2 men and 1 other woman, and they all piled into a black BMW, with Emily sitting right in the front seat next to the driver. Without hesitation, I followed them. The drive took us through the city until we arrived at a high-end restaurant. I parked across the street and watched as they entered the place. Emily seemed happy, laughing and talking with the others. I stayed in my car, patiently waiting. At 2 p.m., they finally came out, and my stomach dropped when I saw her walking next to the same tall, blonde man from the photo. They looked comfortable with each other, and their playful interactions only fueled my anger. I watched them as they returned to her office, disappearing inside. Up until that point, Emily hadn't done anything outright wrong, aside from not telling me everything about her lunches. But it wasn't just lunch with colleagues that worried me, it was the way she acted around him, the way they seemed more like a couple than co-workers. What also struck me was that, unlike other Fridays, she didn't go out with her female friends after work that day. Instead, she came home early, around 5:15 p.m., cheerful as always, her usual smile in place. She seemed calm, completely in control of herself, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I held back from bombarding Emily with questions, but as we sat on the couch after dinner watching TV, I couldn't resist asking her how her day went and what she had for lunch. For a brief moment, she seemed a little confused, but she quickly replied, saying she had a tuna sandwich that she'd made before heading to work. That was a lie. Maybe she was a liar, and possibly more, a cheater. Despite my growing anger, something inside me still longed to hold her, especially when she looked at me with those familiar blue eyes. Even as she told me that obvious lie, a mix of resentment and love tore at me. How could I feel so much love for someone who might be deceiving me like this? But I knew I had to keep my cool, to avoid acting rashly and doing something I'd later regret. Instead of pressing her with more questions, I made the decision to change the subject, talking about my own workday as if nothing had happened. I forced myself to act normal, like I always did on our weekends together. Emily didn't seem to sense the weight of what was really going on. That evening, we even exchanged some flirtatious words, and she acted like her usual affectionate self, the loving wife I had known for years. Over the weekend, we took our daughters to the zoo, trying to create happy memories. For a while, I managed to push the events of the past week to the back of my mind, and the day was full of laughter and fun. Throughout the week, I held off on tracking her during lunch breaks. I had made up my mind to follow her on Friday evening after work instead. When my daughters got home around 3:15 p.m. that Friday, I was already there, waiting. I ordered them pizza to keep them happy and explained that I had some business to attend to at the office. They were growing more independent by the day, so I felt okay leaving them alone as long as they locked the doors. I knew they'd be asleep by the time I got back. With my plan set in motion, I jumped in the car and drove over to Emily's workplace, arriving by 5 p.m. I watched from a distance as she pulled out of the parking lot, heading in the opposite direction from our house. She was clearly on her way to meet her friends for another night out at the pub. It wasn't hard to follow her unnoticed. A line of 6 cars conveniently provided cover for me as we made our way through the city. After about 10 minutes, I saw her Toyota pull into the parking lot of a place called the Glass Shoe, a restaurant and bar combo. I kept my distance, parking at the far end of the lot and making sure to stay out of sight. Once I saw everyone go inside, I got out and walked around the area, scoping out the place where Emily had been spending her nights. The pub sat on a corner, with parking spaces surrounding it on all sides. 2 of its walls faced the street, and the other 2 were bordered by a neatly trimmed cedar fence, about 5 feet tall. It was a bit secluded, but not out of place. Then I spotted it, the black BMW from last Friday. The same car Emily had ridden into the restaurant. It stood out, parked right in front of the cedar hedge, separating itself from the rest of the cars. I took note of the building's layout. There were 2 entrances, one leading to the restaurant and the other to a bar tucked away at the back. Each side had fire exits, but there was a clear distinction between the restaurant and bar areas. Emily's group had entered through the restaurant side, not the bar entrance. I returned to my car and changed into the outfit I had prepared for the night. A black windbreaker, a baseball cap, and a pair of glasses to help me blend in. I even popped a mouth guard into my mouth to alter my appearance just a little, figuring it might help if anyone looked too closely. I glanced at myself in the rearview mirror, feeling confident that I wouldn't be recognized. After waiting another hour in the car, I finally made my move. I stepped into the bar, and there she was, Emily, sitting near the dance floor with a group of people, laughing and drinking. There were 6 women and 4 men at the table, and right next to her sat the same tall man from the restaurant, the one I had seen in that photo. Seeing them so close together stirred up a fresh wave of sadness and disappointment in me. My gut told me something wasn't right between them. Wanting to keep my distance, I chose a table in the far corner of the bar, away from their group. The spot was dimly lit, occupied by others who seemed to be lost in their own troubles. I knew I'd be able to watch unnoticed from there. The music soon started, drawing people out onto the dance floor. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I kept my eyes on them, waiting for whatever might come next. I stood there, watching as Emily danced closely with the man who had been sitting beside her. The remaining 3 men at the table exchanged strange, knowing smiles, clearly enjoying the scene. It became painfully obvious that Emily and this man were more than just casual acquaintances, and everyone in the room could see it. As the night went on, the group gradually shrank until it was just Emily, another woman, and 2 men. Eventually, both couples ended up on the dance floor, leaving no room for doubt. Emily and that man were more than friends. He pulled her in, his hands resting on her waist as they swayed together, their bodies pressed close. Then, to my disbelief, I saw him lean down and whisper something into her ear, followed by a kiss on her cheek. Emily nodded in response, and without hesitation, they left the room hand in hand. Intrigued and full of dread, I quietly followed them outside into the dark street. I kept my distance as I watched them walk toward his car, hand in hand. They headed straight for the black car parked near the cedar hedge, the very spot that offered them privacy. It was clear why he had chosen to park there, far from the other vehicles. The hedge shielded them from prying eyes, and he probably felt confident they wouldn't be seen. Curiosity gnawed at me as I tried to piece together what was about to happen. How far was Emily willing to go with this man? Determined to know the truth, I crept toward the far end of the parking lot, moving stealthily between the cars, trying to stay hidden. Soon, I found myself right next to the back of his car. At first, I couldn't see anyone inside, but it quickly dawned on me that they must have moved to the back seat. The dim light around the hedge made it hard for them to spot me, so I crept even closer, leaning toward one of the rear windows. Unfortunately, the heavy tint on the glass made it impossible to see anything. Even so, I could hear muffled voices coming from inside, and my mind raced with the decision of whether to intervene or wait and catch Emily in the act. The torment of not knowing was overwhelming, but there was no time left to make up my mind. Suddenly, the car began to rock in time with the music, Emily's favorite song, no less. Anger surged through me, and without thinking, I yanked open the door, flooding the car with light. My heart sank as I saw what was inside. There, lying on her back, was my wife, Emily, with her lover on top of her, fully engaged in their affair. I quietly removed the disguise I had prepared, my glasses and the mouthpiece that had altered my appearance. As the interior light illuminated the car, Emily's eyes widened in shock. Recognition hit her like a wave, and within moments, her face transformed from joy to pure disbelief. Her voice trembled as she muttered, "Oh my God, Jake, please, forgive me." Her words were shaky and uncertain, "Don't rush into any decisions you'll regret." It meant nothing to me, just wait. But I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut and walked away, heading straight for my car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I could see Emily chasing after me, her pleas growing louder. Less than 5 minutes later, she arrived home, completely disheveled, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, Jake, I'm so sorry," she cried, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you more than anything in the world. I know I hurt you. Lily, you broke our marriage vows. In 15 years, I've never betrayed you. If I had known you were cheating, maybe I would have looked for comfort elsewhere too. If faithfulness doesn't matter anymore, maybe I should have indulged in my own pleasures," I spat, my voice dripping with anger. "Jake, please, listen to me. I love you with all my heart. What I did, it didn't mean anything. I wish I could turn back time and make it right, but I can't," she sobbed, her face streaked with tears. "You have to believe me, you and our daughters are my world. What happened doesn't compare to our life together." She collapsed onto the sofa, her face buried in her hands, trying to hold back more tears. She kept apologizing, but my patience had worn thin. "Stop apologizing," I shouted, my voice cold. "What you did to our marriage is unforgivable. Tell me who he is and how long this has been going on." A part of me felt relieved that she wasn't standing in front of me anymore. My anger surged as I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her, letting my unfamiliar rage take control. "His name is Nick," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's a colleague from the studio. I swear, this shouldn't have happened. Please believe me, I love you more than anything." A dark thought crossed my mind. "But you've been lying to me about going out with friends for years, haven't you? Have you been seeing him this whole time? Am I supposed to believe this was just a recent thing?" Panic flashed across her face as she cried out, "No. Oh my God, no. It only happened recently, I promise. My love for you has only grown stronger over the years. Please, forgive me, Jake. There was never any real love behind it, just a terrible mistake." Her eyes, swollen and red, pleaded with me for understanding, but I wasn't ready to give it. "You don't understand the seriousness of this," I replied, disappointment heavy in my voice. "Think about your colleagues who saw you. Think about us. How do you think people will look at us now, whether on the street or at the office? This wasn't just some secret affair, it's a public disgrace. You've humiliated me. I couldn't bear it anymore. I'm sorry, but I can't live with this shame. I want a divorce." I was firm in my decision to end our marriage. "Jake, please, I'm begging you," Emily cried, her voice trembling. "Forgive me. You know I can't live without you. Please, reconsider. I'm asking for your forgiveness. I swear it won't happen again. Right now, we need to focus on saving our marriage and protecting our family." As she spoke, I couldn't bear to listen anymore. I stood up and turned away, needing some space to think. "Emily, our marriage started to crumble the moment you chose to be unfaithful. Everything we're dealing with now is because of that betrayal." Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the room, followed by deep, sorrowful sobs. Her cries cut right through me. When I turned back, I saw her collapsed on the floor, head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. In that moment, a whirlwind of emotions overtook me. Part of me wanted to rush over, hold her, and offer comfort, but the anger and betrayal I felt were too powerful. I couldn't bring myself to stay close to her, unsure if I could trust myself not to lash out. Without saying a word, I left the house and checked into a hotel for the night. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind filled with the chaos of the night. By morning, I called my secretary, telling her I wouldn't be in the office that day. I stayed in that hotel room until noon, lost in thought, replaying everything that had happened. Eventually, hunger nudged me out, and I headed to the hotel restaurant, though I barely touched my meal. With a heavy heart, I decided to drive to the office, but on my way, I glanced over at our house. To my surprise, there was a green Toyota parked out front. My anxiety spiked at the sight of it, but I soon realized it belonged to Emily's sister, Francine. The thought of Francine being there offered a slight sense of relief. At least my daughters would have someone to lean on, especially with everything that had happened with their mother. What I didn't know at the time was how much worse things had gotten. After I left the night before, Emily had called her sister, overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. It led to a severe emotional breakdown, and now, she was in the hospital, trying to recover. I didn't learn any of this until I got to my office. That's when I received a call from Francine. She sounded worried, her voice tense. She told me that Emily's condition was critical. She was a wreck, constantly crying, anxious, and barely holding it together. What shocked me the most was that less than an hour after I had left the night before, my older daughter had called Francine, panicked because Emily was acting irrational and I wasn't there. Francine rushed to the house as quickly as she could. When she arrived, she found Emily in such a bad state that she immediately called for an ambulance. Now, Francine was staying at the house to look after my daughters and urged me to visit Emily at Santa Maria City Hospital. As I listened to her, waves of shock and guilt washed over me. Had I really left my family at such a critical time? Did I abandon them when they needed me most? The guilt was suffocating, especially when I thought back to the night before. If I had stayed, I feared that my emotions, still raw from her betrayal, could have driven me to something cruel. The pain she had caused was unbearable, but leaving my family like that? That wasn't who I was. I had always prided myself on facing problems head-on. I never thought of myself as someone who runs away from things. But last night, that's exactly what I did. Now, I was left wondering, was walking away really the best choice? Regret weighed me down like a heavy stone, and soon, tears began to stream down my face as I sat there behind my desk. Was there an alternative? Could I have chosen forgiveness instead? Maybe, just maybe, there was still a distant chance to salvage what was left of our relationship. Of course, the situation we were in was because of Emily's actions. She bore the responsibility for breaking the sacred trust of our marriage. But ending it, I knew that would tear apart our daughters' lives. And I wasn't sure if I could live with that. I realized I had to explore a different solution. I had to at least consider the possibility of forgiveness. Slowly, as the shock of Emily's hospitalization set in, I found a renewed determination. Without hesitating, I got into my car and drove straight to the hospital, determined to face the truth of what had happened. Doubt clouded my mind the entire drive. I had no plan for what I was going to say to her, or how I would react when I saw her again. But one thing was clear, I needed to get to the bottom of things. I needed to know the truth. As I entered the hospital, uncertainty filled every step I took. I reflected on a piece of advice my mother once shared with me: cheaters will always face the consequences of their actions. That thought echoed in my mind as I wrestled with the weight of Emily's betrayal. When we first got married, we were just 20 years old, and our marriage had felt like a dream come true. We had 2 wonderful daughters, a comfortable home in a nice neighborhood, and a love that I believed was unshakable. Financially, we were secure, and, above all, the love between us was undeniable. But life took a turn I never expected. Not long after our younger daughter turned 6, Emily landed a job at a film studio nearby. With her fluency in several languages, she quickly found success as a film translator. Her skills were impressive, and the job provided us with even more financial stability. For 5 years, she thrived in that role, until the day a new translator joined the team. He was tall, charismatic, and blonde, and it didn't take long before he became the talk of the studio. Though many admired him, he didn't seem to notice. What did catch his attention was Emily's shared talent for languages, which led to frequent interactions at work. Over time, what began as a professional relationship turned into a close friendship, and that's where the trouble began. Unbeknownst to me, Emily's feelings for him deepened before she even realized it. At first, he treated her like any other colleague, keeping things professional. But as time passed, something shifted. He started attending the bi-weekly gatherings with her work group, and slowly, their bond grew stronger. They shared personal stories, confided in one another, and connected in ways that Emily never told me about. Her first misstep was not telling me when men began joining these outings. And from there, things only escalated. Their connection grew more intense, and soon, they were dancing at these events, swaying to slow songs, their bodies moving as one. Meanwhile, I was completely oblivious. In the dim light of the dance floor, Emily found herself wrapped in his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that shook her to the core. That moment set off a chain of events that would change everything. The following Friday, during another one of these gatherings, he found an excuse to take her away from the pub, leading to a passionate encounter in his car. In the darkness of the parking lot, they gave in to their desires, becoming entangled in a backseat affair that spiraled out of control. Overcome with guilt, Emily came home that night and tried to shower me with affection, as if trying to make up for what she had done. But as her husband, I deserved more than affection, I deserved loyalty. Still, she struggled to distance herself from him. Their interactions at work were constant, and the more comfortable they grew around each other, the harder it became for her to pull away. Yet Emily's love for me, she claimed, never wavered. I was willing to give everything up for Jake, she later confessed, because my love for him is unbreakable. But her affair continued for 4 months. And now, as she lay in that hospital bed, she revealed every painful detail to me, her eyes brimming with tears. I sat there, listening, tears rolling down my face as well. Emily swore she would do anything to save our marriage, but I couldn't decide if I could live with the memories of her infidelity. I couldn't bring myself to tell her my true feelings, not in her fragile state. So, after visiting her at the hospital, I quietly returned to my hotel room and called my lawyer, instructing him to prepare the divorce papers. I worried about how the divorce would affect Emily, especially given her condition. I didn't want her to suffer any more than she already had, but I knew it was inevitable. While the papers were being finalized, I spent as much time as I could with our daughters, savoring every moment with them. I had no intention of fighting for full custody. I believed that Emily and I should raise them together, just not under the same roof. But my plans began to unravel when my lawyer delivered the divorce papers to Emily in the hospital. Upon learning of the divorce, her emotional state took a drastic turn for the worse. That terrible day marked a turning point. Emily suffered a stroke when she realized I had initiated the divorce proceedings. When her doctor called to inform me, I was flooded with self-loathing. I should have waited until she had recovered before moving forward with the divorce. I stayed by her side for 3 days, holding her hand, watching helplessly as her condition worsened. 2 months later, Emily had only made partial improvement. She was left paralyzed on her left side, and it broke my heart to see her like that. I blamed myself for what had happened. But at the same time, I knew that if she hadn't been unfaithful, none of this would have occurred. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that I could stay in the same house with Emily and our daughters, I just couldn't see it happening. The guilt of initiating the divorce weighed heavily on me, but I couldn't shake the pain of her betrayal. As much as I had loved her, the trust was gone, and so was the life we had once shared. I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at her, the image of that night in the car flooded my mind, and the betrayal hit me all over again. It was a wound that couldn't heal, no matter how hard I tried. So, I packed up my things and moved into a nearby apartment, close enough to still be a father to my daughters, but far enough to give myself some space. It wasn't how I wanted things to end, but it was Lily who had brought our once perfect life to ruins. Days turned into weeks, and although I found some solace in spending time with my girls, the weight of what had happened lingered over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. Lily was still in the hospital, slowly recovering, and though I visited the girls often, my conversations with her were few and strained. The divorce papers were still unsigned, sitting in a folder on my kitchen counter. Then one evening, I got a call that changed everything. It was from Francine, Lily's sister. Her voice was shaky as she told me that Nick, the man Lily had an affair with, had shown up at the hospital. He'd been lurking around for days, trying to see Lily. When he finally confronted her, something snapped. In her fragile state, Lily had been pushed to her emotional limits, and she lashed out, revealing the full extent of their affair to hospital staff, strangers, and even some of our mutual friends who had come to visit her. Rumors spread quickly, and it wasn't long before the truth about her affair became public knowledge at the studio where she worked. Nick was immediately fired when his involvement with a married co-worker came to light, and Lily was left humiliated, her once respected reputation shattered. This public exposure of the affair was a shock to everyone. For me, it brought an odd sense of closure. But that wasn't the end. One night, about 2 weeks after the confrontation, I received an urgent call from Francine again. "Jake, you need to come to the hospital. It's serious." The panic in her voice was enough to make me rush out the door. When I arrived, the sight that greeted me was worse than anything I had imagined. Lily, despite her physical and emotional limitations, had gathered enough strength to confront Nick one last time. The hospital staff had found her trying to confront him in the parking lot, where a heated argument broke out. In her fragile state, it was too much for her body to handle. She collapsed and had been rushed back inside, her condition more critical than ever. I stood there, outside her room, torn between my lingering anger and the faint remnants of love I once had for her. As the doctors worked to stabilize her, I realized I had reached a crossroads. I could either continue living in this endless loop of pain, or I could choose to finally let go of the past. That night, as I sat in the waiting room, I made my decision. When the doctor came out, I nodded, gave my consent, and entered Lily's room one last time. There she lay, unconscious, but fighting for her life. I took her hand, feeling the weight of our history between us. "Lily," I whispered, "I've spent so long trying to hate you, but maybe it's time to forgive. Not for you, but for me. For our daughters. I'm not sure we'll ever find peace, but I can't keep holding on to this anger." I stood there for a few moments longer, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, before turning to leave. This time, I knew it was for good. I wasn't running away, I was choosing my own peace. I stepped out of that hospital, into the cool night air, and felt something lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply, knowing that my future, whatever it held, would be my own. Back in my new apartment, I signed the divorce papers that had been gathering dust. I didn't know what the future had in store, but I knew I was done with the past. The next morning, I packed a bag and took my daughters on a weekend trip. As we drove out of town, the sun rising in the distance, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw their smiling faces, reminders of what really mattered. And as we left the city behind, I felt, for the first time, a sense of freedom. Maybe forgiveness wasn't for Lily. Maybe it was for me, to finally let go and reclaim my life. And with that, I drove forward, leaving the ghosts of the past behind, ready to build something new. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel to watch my next videos and share with me your opinion, what you would do in my place.